Somehow, that was her name, let out a startled gasp, grabbing the sheets to cover herself. Clara felt something inside her shatter. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something that clawed at her chest and left her breathless. The long nights of care, the sacrifices, the exhaustion. She had given him everything. And for what? Her hands shook at her sides. The room felt like it was spinning, but she forced herself to stay upright. Clara. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, his expression unreadable. She couldn't hear him. Or maybe she refused to. Her gaze shifted from his face to the tangled sheets, to the way Sabrina clutched them to her chest, to the betrayal painted across every inch of this moment. She had spent months nursing a lie. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed for, had never been sick. He had never needed her care. And now, as she stood there, her world crumbling around her, she realized he had never deserved it either. Clara stood frozen at the threshold of the bedroom, her heart racing, her pulse deafening in her ears. The weight of betrayal crushed her chest, and yet she found herself unable to move, unable to look away from Ethan's face. His eyes filled with guilt, but also something darker. He had been lying to her for months, using her kindness, her love, her unwavering devotion as a shield. Ethan's voice broke the silence, his tone defensive, almost dismissive. Clara, you're overreacting. This doesn't mean anything. It's just a mistake, that's all. Her breath hitched in disbelief. Overreacting? Her entire world was collapsing around her, and he thought she was overreacting? She clenched her fists, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. A mistake, she repeated, her voice trembling. You've been lying to me for months. You pretended to be sick. You manipulated me. Ethan shifted uncomfortably on the bed, his gaze darting between Clara and Sabrina, who had now covered herself completely, her face flushed with embarrassment. Ethan's eyes, once filled with love and promises, now seemed distant, cold even. He exhaled sharply, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. Clara, listen, he started, his voice now lower, more composed. You've been working so hard, and I— No, Clara interrupted, the anger rising in her chest. No, don't you dare try to make me feel sorry for you. I've been working myself to the bone, taking care of you, believing in you. Why, you've been playing me for a fool. Ethan let out a frustrated sigh, his eyes narrowing as he met her gaze. I didn't ask for your sympathy. I just wanted peace. You've been so good to me, Clara. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. So I faked it. I faked being sick. I knew you would take care of me. Clara's stomach churned. She staggered back a step, as if the very air around her had thickened, suffocating her. You used me, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. You took advantage of me, of my love for you. Ethan's face twisted, but there was no remorse there. It wasn't like that, Clara. It was easier this way. You were so kind, so willing to help. I could live comfortably, do nothing, and you'd never question it. Sabrina. He gestured toward the woman still sitting in their bed. She was just a distraction, nothing more. Clara could barely hear him anymore, the sound of his voice becoming a distant hum. The man she had trusted with her whole heart, the man she had cared for, had turned out to be nothing more than a liar and a manipulator. Every moment she had spent by his side, every sacrifice, every act of love, it had all been for nothing. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, Clara felt the overwhelming weight of her own naivety. How had she not seen it? How had she not noticed the cracks in his facade? The subtle signs, the inconsistencies, the way he always found an excuse to avoid work, to avoid life. You're sick, Ethan, Clara whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. But it's not physical. It's worse. You've poisoned everything, every ounce of trust one had in you. Ethan's face twisted in frustration, his words now dripping with disdain. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was never meant to be this dramatic. Clara shook her head, finally gathering the strength to walk away. The truth had broken her. She would never look at him the same way again. As she left the room, her heart heavy with the realization that everything she had believed in had been a lie. She vowed never to let herself be deceived again. Clara's hands shook as she packed the last of her belongings into a small suitcase, the weight of the decision bearing down on her like 1,000 tons. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt cold, suffocating, each corner tainted with the lies Ethan had spun for months. The walls that had witnessed their shared dreams now felt like a prison, one she could no longer bear to live in. She moved through the house in a daze, her mind a whirl of emotions. She didn't look back when she picked up the framed photo of their wedding day, the one that had once been her pride and joy. She couldn't bear to see the hopeful faces staring back at her. The love that had once felt so real had been nothing more than an illusion, a web of deceit carefully spun by the man she had trusted with her heart. Ethan stood in the doorway of their bedroom, his expression a mix of desperation and guilt. "Clara, please don't do this. We can talk about this. We can fix it. I'm sorry. I made a mistake." Clara couldn't bring herself to look at him. His words were empty, meaningless. She had heard them before, time and time again, but they no longer held any weight. His apology meant nothing, not when it was laced with the same manipulative undertones that had kept her chained to him for far too long. "You're sorry." Clara's voice was a whisper, but it carried all the pain she had been holding in for so long. "Sorry for what, Ethan? Sorry that you got caught? Sorry that you used me? Sorry that you broke my heart? Or are you sorry that your perfect little world is falling apart?" Ethan's face twisted in frustration. "Clara, you're making a mistake. I love you. I need you." The words, so familiar and yet so hollow, were like a dagger to her chest. She had heard them countless times, each one more meaningless than the last. They had meant something once, back when she had believed in him, but now they only reminded her of everything he had done to her. The manipulation, the betrayal, the lies. She couldn't keep living like this. Not anymore. "No," Clara said firmly, zipping her suitcase closed. "You don't get to love me, Ethan. Not after everything you've done. I'm done. I'm leaving." Ethan stepped forward, his voice rising in panic. "Clara, please. Don't go. I'll change, I swear. Just stay. Please don't leave me." Clara paused for a moment, but only to steady herself. She could feel the tears threatening to spill, the ache in her chest threatening to drown her. But she couldn't let him see that. She couldn't let him know how deeply he had hurt her. Without a word, she walked past him, her footsteps heavy but resolute. She would not be trapped in his lies anymore. As she stepped out the door, she felt an odd sense of relief, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. But the ache was still there, gnawing at her insides, the pain of losing the man she had once believed in, the man she had given everything to. Clara drove in a daze, the road before her stretching out endlessly. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay there. Not in that house. Not with him. Her best friend's home was the only place that felt safe now, a sanctuary where she could gather her thoughts and let the tears fall. When Clara arrived, her best friend, Amelia, pulled her into a tight embrace, offering the comfort Clara had so desperately needed but hadn't known how to ask for. Clara broke down, the dam inside her finally bursting open. The sobs came in waves, raw and uncontrollable. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the pain, the betrayal, the anger. She didn't have to hide it anymore. As the tears subsided, Clara looked up at Amelia, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes fierce with determination. "I won't let him destroy me," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "I won't be his victim anymore." Amelia nodded, her voice soft but strong. "You're not, Clara. You're stronger than you think." And in that moment, Clara felt a flicker of something inside her, something that hadn't been there in a long time. It was a spark, small and fragile, but it was enough. She wasn't broken. She wasn't lost. She was going to rebuild, starting now. She would no longer be defined by Ethan's lies. She would rise above it. The fire that ignited within her was only the beginning. Clara took her first steps, toward reclaiming her life with a determination she hadn't known she was capable of. It wasn't easy, but each step forward brought her closer to the woman she had once been before Ethan's betrayal had shattered her world. The decision to move on wasn't instantaneous. It was a process, a journey that began with confronting the legal realities of her marriage. She met with a lawyer, sitting in a cold, sterile office where the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. Divorce. The word itself felt foreign, but Clara didn't hesitate. She knew it was the only way to truly free herself from the web of lies Ethan had woven. The lawyer, though kind, didn't offer empty promises. Instead, she laid out the facts and helped Clara understand her options, assuring her that she would not have to face the battle alone. It was a small comfort, but one Clara clung to. In the weeks that followed, Clara poured herself into rediscovering the things she had lost in the midst of her marriage. She had once loved painting, a hobby that had been pushed aside for far too long, and now she found herself picking up her brush once again. The strokes were hesitant at first, but with each passing day, the colors on her canvas grew bolder, more vibrant. It was a form of expression she had forgotten about, a way to release the pain and the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Clara also began to focus on self-care, something she had neglected for far too long. She took long walks in the park, read books that had long been gathering dust on her shelves, and spent time doing things that made her feel alive again. She started to appreciate the quiet moments, the peacefulness that came with living for herself. Therapy became another important part of her healing journey. At first, the sessions were difficult. She had so many emotions bottled up inside, but she learned to speak about them in a safe space. The therapist didn't offer solutions or quick fixes. She simply listened and helped Clara process the complicated layers of her grief. It was a slow journey, but with each session, Clara felt lighter, as if the weight of her past was slowly lifting. Through all of this, Clara's friends, especially Amelia, were there for her. Their support was unwavering, and they helped her stay grounded when the doubts and the pain threatened to overwhelm her. Amelia, in particular, made sure Clara knew she wasn't alone, whether it was through heartfelt conversations or simply spending time together. No words needed. The love and support of her friends became a lifeline in the storm, reminding Clara that her worth wasn't defined by Ethan's actions. Ethan, of course, didn't just let her go without a fight. He tried to contact her, sending texts and leaving voicemails, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. He claimed he had changed, that he would do whatever it took to win her back. But Clara had heard it all before, and she knew better now. His words, though once capable of breaking her heart, no longer held any power over her. His betrayal was unforgivable. The damage he had done could not be erased by empty promises. Clara remained firm in her decision, focusing on her own growth and healing. She wasn't the same person she had been when she had walked into their marriage, blindly trusting in the man she thought she knew. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more in tune with her own needs. Ethan's attempts to reconcile were nothing more than a reminder of her past, but Clara knew the future was hers to shape, and she would no longer allow his mistakes to define her. She was reclaiming her life, one day at a time. As the final papers were signed and the divorce was officially finalized, Clara couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. The weight that had been suffocating her for so long was finally lifted, and while there was still pain from the past, it was overshadowed by a renewed sense of self. The legal battle had been difficult, but now, with everything behind her, Clara stood tall, no longer burdened by the lies and the manipulation that had once consumed her. My husband pretended to be sick, but I found his mistress in our home. Clara moved through the small apartment with practiced ease, balancing a tray of warm soup in one hand while flipping through a stack of unpaid bills with the other. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders, but she ignored it, just as she had been doing for months. Ethan needed her. That was all that mattered. She had promised to stand by him in sickness and in health, and she would not break that vow now. She placed the tray beside him on the couch, where he had been resting for what felt like an eternity. His face was pale, his expression weary, yet there was something about the way his fingers gripped his phone, so steady, so firm, that made a flicker of doubt creep into her mind. She quickly pushed it away. Of course, he was weak. The doctor had said his condition would take time to heal. Still, there were moments that made her question. The other night, she had caught him standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He had moved so quickly back to the couch when he noticed her that it almost seemed unnatural. There were also the occasional slips in his words, moments where he seemed to forget which symptoms he was supposed to have. Clara told herself she was imagining things, that stress was making her see problems where none existed. She thought back to the early days of their marriage. They had been so happy then, filled with dreams of traveling the world, of building a future together. Ethan had been her rock, her partner in everything. And now, she was carrying both of their burdens alone. She worked long hours at the office, pushing herself to exhaustion so she could pay the bills and keep food on the table. Then she came home to care for him, making sure he had everything he needed. She had no time for herself, no room to breathe, but she did not complain. This was love. This was what it meant to be a devoted wife. And yet, the uneasiness lingered. It was in the way he avoided her eyes when she asked about his health. It was in the way he flinched whenever she mentioned getting a second opinion from a different doctor. It was in the way his phone always seemed to light up with messages when he thought she wasn't looking. Clara shook her head, scolding herself for doubting him. Ethan needed her trust, not her suspicion. She smoothed a hand over his blanket, whispering a soft reassurance before turning away. But as she moved to the kitchen, her heart remained heavy. She could ignore her doubts, bury them deep within her, but they would not disappear. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet. Clara moved through her daily routine like clockwork, but an unsettling feeling had started creeping into her mind. It was subtle at first, little things that could be easily dismissed. But as days passed, those little things started piling up, forming cracks in the perfect illusion she had built around her marriage. She opened the bathroom cabinet one morning, reaching for Ethan's prescribed medication. Her fingers brushed against the bottles, but something made her pause. The labels were worn from frequent handling, but the contents remained almost untouched. She frowned, pulling one of the bottles closer. The refill date was over 2 weeks ago, yet the pills were nearly full. Her heart gave a small, uneasy lurch. Had he been forgetting to take them? She carried the bottle to the living room, where Ethan lay on the couch, watching television. His legs were stretched out comfortably, his fingers idly scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she approached, his face calm, unreadable. "You haven't been taking your medicine," she said, her voice carefully neutral. He blinked at her, then glanced at the bottle in her hand. "Of course, I have," he said smoothly, reaching for it. "I just take them when you're not looking. You worry too much." Clara hesitated. Maybe he was right. She was constantly hovering over him, making sure he ate, making sure he rested. Maybe she was overthinking everything. But then there were other things, his appetite, his energy levels. Some days, he barely touched his food, complaining of nausea or fatigue. Other days, she would find empty snack wrappers on the coffee table, as if he had eaten late at night when she wasn't around. Then there was the perfume, a faint, unfamiliar scent that clung to the cushions, the hallway, even his shirts. It wasn't hers. She hadn't worn perfume in weeks, too exhausted to care about such things. But it was there, lingering in the air like an unspoken question. She tried to ignore it, just as she tried to ignore the growing concerns from their family and friends. Her mother had called the other day, her voice cautious but firm. "Clara, are you sure Ethan is getting the right care? Maybe he should see a specialist." Her best friend, Lydia, had echoed the same thoughts. "It's strange, Clara. If he's not improving, shouldn't the doctors be doing more? Why hasn't he gone for additional tests?" Clara had defended him, assuring them that Ethan was doing everything he could to recover. She had told herself the same thing over and over again, forcing herself to believe it. She wanted to believe it, but as she stood in their quiet apartment, staring at the untouched medicine bottle in her hand, doubt whispered in her mind. Maybe she wasn't imagining things. Maybe the cracks were real. Clara stepped into the apartment, her body aching with exhaustion after another long day at work. She had left early, a rare stroke of luck that she had planned to use for a quiet evening with Ethan. Maybe they could have dinner together, talk, and reconnect. Lately, everything had felt distant, like she was holding on to a love that was slipping through her fingers. As she set her bag down, a faint sound drifted from the bedroom. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but then it came again, soft laughter, a hushed whisper. Her breath caught. Her feet moved forward before she could stop them, each step feeling heavier than the last. The laughter grew clearer, playful, intimate. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Maybe she was mistaken. Maybe the TV was on. Maybe. Her trembling hand pressed against the bedroom door, and she pushed it open. Time slowed. There, tangled in the sheets of their bed, was Ethan. His bare skin, his strong frame, completely free of the weakness he had claimed for months. He wasn't sick. He wasn't frail. He was very much alive, very much whole. And he wasn't alone. A woman, young, beautiful, unfamiliar, was beside him. Her arms were wrapped around him, her expression shifting from pleasure to horror as she realized they had been caught. The air in Clara's lungs vanished. Ethan's eyes met hers. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then Sabrina, because Clara knew. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself facing the consequences of his actions. The comfortable life he had built on deceit and manipulation crumbled before him. With Clara gone, so too did the stability she had brought into their home. His carefully constructed world of luxury and ease was now nothing more than a distant memory. The house felt empty without her presence, her warmth, her kindness, the love she had poured into their marriage. It was gone, and in its place, there was only regret. He had betrayed the one person who had stood by him through everything, and now he was left with nothing. Clara, for the first time in years, embraced her independence. She moved into a new home, a fresh start that reflected the new chapter of her life. The apartment was modest, but it was hers. The walls, once cold and unfamiliar, began to feel like home as she settled in. It wasn't the grandeur she had once shared with Ethan, but it was peaceful, and it was hers. Each day, she felt more and more confident in her decision. She was free to live her life on her terms, to build something that was hers and hers alone. She filled her new space with the things that brought her joy: family photos, art supplies for her painting, and books that reminded her of who she was before Ethan had entered her life. She found herself smiling again, a smile that had once felt foreign but was now becoming a natural expression of her newfound strength. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer had the power to define her. She had reclaimed her life. Meanwhile, Ethan's world continued to unravel. He tried to reach out to Clara again, but each attempt was met with silence. He could no longer deny the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. He had lost the best thing in his life. Clara had given him everything: love, loyalty, and a sense of security he had never fully appreciated. And now, he was left with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. The realization hit him hard, but it was too late to make amends. Clara, though, was no longer the woman who had once blindly loved and trusted him. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future that lay ahead. She had learned to trust herself again, to put her own needs first, and to recognize her worth. She walked away from the past, leaving behind the shadows of betrayal and hurt. And as she stepped into her new life, she felt a sense of hope that had long been buried beneath the pain. She was ready for a fresh start, a future that was hers to shape, free from the lies and manipulation of the man who had once held her heart. And with that, Clara walked away from the remnants of her old life, stronger than ever before.